Everyone thinks their pain threshold has a limit. They're wrong. You've convinced yourself that there's only so much you can handle before you break. But what if everything you believe about your own strength is actually backwards? We spend our entire lives running from discomfort. We medicate it, we distract from it, we pretend it doesn't exist. And every single time we do, we reinforce the lie that pain is something we're not equipped to face. But the Stoics knew something different. They understood that your pain threshold isn't fixed. It's not some biological ceiling you were born with. It's a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows through resistance. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while his body was falling apart. Epictetus was enslaved, tortured, his leg broken by his master. And in that moment, with his leg snapping, he didn't scream about injustice. He looked at his oppressor and said, "You can break my leg, but you cannot break my will." That wasn't superhuman. That was Stoic training. That was a man who had spent years understanding what was actually in his control and what wasn't. Here's what changes everything. Pain is information, not verdict. Your body hurts, your heart breaks, your plans collapse. That's data. It's telling you something, but it's not telling you that you can't handle it. It's showing you exactly where you need to grow. The Stoics had a practice. When faced with difficulty, they'd ask themselves one question: is this in my control? Your pain, your emotions, your initial reaction, those aren't fully in your control. But your response to them, that's everything. That's where your actual power lives. Now let's go deeper, because understanding this intellectually and living it are two completely different things. Seneca spent his entire life building wealth and status. He was one of the richest men in Rome. And then he lost it all. His property was seized, his influence stripped away. And you know what he wrote? That he'd been preparing for this his entire life without even knowing it. Every moment of discomfort, every small loss, every rejection had been training. His pain threshold had been quietly strengthening in the background. That's the secret the Stoics discovered that modern people miss. You don't build your pain threshold by seeking out pain. You build it by responding differently to the pain that already comes. And pain always comes. Loss comes. Failure comes. Rejection comes. These aren't anomalies. They're the baseline of human existence. Think about your own life right now. What's the thing that scares you most? What's the pain you're most afraid of experiencing? Now imagine that pain actually happening. Sit with that for a second. How would you respond? Would you fall apart? Would you blame everyone around you? Would you spiral into despair? Or would you pause and ask yourself, what's actually in my control here? That pause is everything. That's where the Stoics lived. They weren't fearless. Marcus Aurelius was terrified of plague sweeping through Rome. Epictetus was genuinely afraid of his master's violence. Fear didn't paralyze them because they'd trained their minds to separate fear from action. Fear could exist, but it didn't get to decide what they did. Here's a practice you can use today. The Stoics called it negative visualization. Imagine the worst reasonable outcome of your current situation. Don't fantasize about catastrophe. Just think through logically, what's the actual worst case? And then ask yourself, could I survive that? Could I adapt to it? Could I find meaning in it? Most of the time, the answer is yes. And that realization alone shifts your pain threshold instantly. Seneca did this constantly. Before any major event, he'd imagine failure. Before traveling, he'd imagine losing his money. Before going into public, he'd imagine humiliation. And by the time the actual event happened, his mind had already adjusted. The pain threshold had expanded because he'd mentally rehearsed it. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think expanding your pain threshold means becoming numb. It doesn't. The Stoics weren't trying to not feel pain. They were trying to feel it without being controlled by it. There's a huge difference. You can hurt and still be clear. You can grieve and still be strong. You can fail and still move forward. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly. He talks about how his body might betray him, how circumstances might crush him. But his will, his character, his ability to choose his response, that was inviolable. And here's the thing, he wasn't special. He didn't have superhuman genetics or some secret advantage. He just trained his mind the way you'd train your body at the gym. So what does that training look like practically? It starts with this. Stop exaggerating your pain. Your mind has a tendency to catastrophize. You have a bad day, and suddenly you think your entire life is ruined. You make one mistake, and you think you're a failure. You experience one rejection, and you think you'll never be loved again. The Stoics called this tyranny of the imagination. And the antidote is simple. Describe your pain exactly as it is, without the story you've added to it. You didn't get the promotion. That's the fact. The story might be, I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. I'm destined to fail. But the fact is just, I didn't get the promotion this time. That's it. And when you separate the fact from the story, your pain threshold expands instantly because you're not fighting two battles anymore. You're fighting one. Epictetus taught this relentlessly. He said, people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. Your pain threshold isn't determined by how much physical or emotional hurt you experience. It's determined by how you interpret that experience. And interpretation is something you can control. Here's another practice. Compartmentalize. When you're in pain, your mind wants to generalize it. One thing goes wrong, and suddenly everything feels wrong. The Stoics would isolate the problem. This relationship ended. That's difficult. But my ability to think clearly, my friendships, my health, my capacity to create, those are separate. They exist independently. Compartmentalizing doesn't minimize your pain. It prevents it from infecting everything else. Think about the last time you experienced real hurt. Maybe it was a breakup, a job loss, a betrayal. In that moment, did it feel like everything was falling apart? That's your mind generalizing. The Stoics would say, no. This one thing is difficult right now. Everything else is still standing. And that simple reframing gives you room to breathe. Now, I want to talk about something crucial. Your pain threshold isn't just about surviving pain. It's about using it as a catalyst for growth. The Stoics didn't just endure hardship. They extracted meaning from it. They asked, what is this teaching me? What strength am I building? What character is being forged right now? Seneca wrote that without adversity, virtue has no opportunity to flourish. Think about that. Your pain isn't your enemy. It's your curriculum. Every difficulty is a class you're taking in resilience, in clarity, in what actually matters. And the moment you shift from victim mentality to student mentality, your entire relationship with pain changes. This is why Epictetus could say that his master, breaking his leg, was actually a gift. Not because he enjoyed pain, but because he understood that his pain threshold, his character, his ability to remain virtuous under pressure, that was the only thing that actually mattered. Everything else, including his physical comfort, was secondary. So here's what you're going to do. Today, when something hurts, when something goes wrong, pause. Ask yourself 3 questions. First, what is actually in my control right now? Second, what story am I telling myself about this pain? And third, how can this become my teacher? That's the Stoic approach to pain threshold. It's not about being tough. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about understanding yourself deeply enough to know that you can feel pain and still choose your response. You can hurt and still be strong. You can fail and still move forward. Your pain threshold is stronger than you think because you've already survived every difficult day that's come before this one. You're here. You made it through. And you'll make it through again. That's not optimism. That's evidence. That's proof of your actual capability. Subscribe for more on building unshakable resilience through Stoic wisdom. And if this resonated with you, let me know in the comments what pain you're working through right now. Because the Stoics understood that we're all in this together, and the struggle itself is what connects us.